I mean, I said, that by the time I'm done, you'll have nothing left. Not him, not this house, not even your name. I stood by the window, staring at the soft glow of the New Year's lights outside. The scene felt almost mocking, a sharp contrast to the cold calculations running through my mind. At 65, I wasn't a man easily fooled, but for 43 years, I had let my wife, Amanda, convince me that we were unshakable. Tonight, as the clock neared midnight, I wasn't that trusting man anymore. Amanda had said she was out running errands, picking up last-minute supplies for our New Year's Eve gathering. She lied. I had proof, solid, undeniable proof. Weeks ago, I had placed a GPS tracker in her car, not out of paranoia but for clarity. Tonight, the screen told me everything I needed to know. Her car wasn't at the grocery store. It was parked outside an exclusive mansion on the edge of town, a place we had no connection to. When I heard the front door open, I remained calm. No anger, no outburst. I turned to face her as she entered, carrying a neatly wrapped gift and balancing her coat over one arm. Her smile was warm, practiced, once comforting, but not tonight. "Sorry I'm late," she said, her voice light and almost too cheerful. "You wouldn't believe how crazy it is out there. Everyone's running around last minute." I studied her face, really studied it. For the first time in years, I noticed the rehearsed ease in her smile and the way she avoided my gaze for just a second too long. I used to think I knew her better than anyone. Now, she looked like a stranger. "Busy night?" I asked, my voice steady and deliberate. She hesitated briefly before recovering. "Oh, you know how it is? Crowds everywhere." I picked up the champagne. She held up the bottle as if it were a prize, something to distract me from the truth. I didn't respond. Instead, I let the silence do the talking. As Amanda stood there, holding the champagne like it was some grand offering, I let the silence stretch, wanting her to feel it, to sense the tension she thought she was cleverly avoiding. She always loved chaos, the little whirlwinds of excitement and disorder. Tonight, she'd met a storm she wasn't prepared for. "I hope you got everything we need for tomorrow," I said, my tone steady, sharp enough to cut through her act. "Oh, of course," she chirped, placing the bottle on the counter and setting her coat aside. "Everything's ready. It's going to be perfect." Her movements were careful, deliberate, but I saw the cracks. The slight tremor in her hand as she adjusted her hair, the way she avoided looking at me for more than a second. She thought she was in control. "Perfect," I echoed, my eyes locked on hers. "Just like your night, I imagine." She froze for the briefest moment. It was subtle, but I caught it. "What's that supposed to mean?" she asked, her voice a little too light, a little too defensive. "I'm just saying," I replied, taking a seat at the dining table. "You seem fulfilled. Long day, errands, traffic. You've really gone the extra mile." Amanda laughed, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Well, you know me, always trying to make everything just right." I didn't answer. Instead, I casually pulled out my phone, scrolling, making sure she saw the screen flash. She didn't know it yet, but that little device held her entire night's itinerary, down to the address of the mansion she thought I wouldn't know about. "Funny thing," I began, breaking the silence. She turned back to face me, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Oh, what's that?" "Your car," I said, not looking up from my phone. "You know, GPS is a wonderful thing. Tracks every move, every stop." I looked up now, locking eyes with her. Even the ones you don't think anyone's watching. Her face paled, but she quickly masked it with a laugh. "What are you talking about, Daniel? You've always had such a vivid imagination." I leaned forward, hands clasped on the table. "Let's drop the pretense, Amanda. You weren't running errands. You weren't stuck in traffic. I know exactly where you were." The room fell silent, except for the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. "Daniel, I don't know what you're implying, but..." "Enough," I said, my voice low but commanding. "Don't insult me with your denials. The mansion on Westwood Drive. That's where you were." Her jaw tightened, her carefully crafted expression slipping. "You've been spying on me?" she asked, the words sharp. "Spying?" I scoffed. "I've been paying attention. Something you clearly didn't think I was capable of anymore. For the first time in years, I saw her for what she really was, a manipulator, someone who thrived on my trust and used it against me. But tonight, I wasn't playing the fool. I continued standing up and pacing. I always thought our partnership meant something. I built a life for us. I gave you stability, respect. And what did you do with it? You sought chaos. Because God forbid you find peace in anything worthwhile. Amanda crossed her arms, her expression hardening. You're being dramatic. Am I? I snapped, turning to face her. You think I don't see the signs? The lies, the excuses, the way you can't even look me in the eye anymore? Do you think I'm blind, Amanda? She opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off. I know about the mansion. I know about the meetings. And I know who you're meeting there. Her composure cracked. For the first time, she looked genuinely cornered. Daniel, I can explain. No, I interrupted firmly. You don't get to explain. You had your chance to be honest, to respect me enough to tell the truth. But instead, you lied. Over and over again. I could see her mind racing, calculating her next move, but it was too late. This isn't a negotiation, I said, grabbing my keys from the counter. Tomorrow we're done. You'll pack your things and leave. No second chances. No reconciliations. You wanted to gamble with our life? Well, congratulations. You lost. I walked out the door, leaving her stunned and speechless in the middle of the room. For the first time in years, I felt clarity. Amanda might have thought she was the storm in this marriage, but tonight I showed her who the hurricane really was. I paused at the door, my hand gripping the knob. Behind me, I heard Amanda's voice tremble as she called my name, desperation bleeding into her tone. I didn't move. It's not what you think, Daniel, she pleaded, her words faltering. Please, just give me a chance to explain. Her attempts to regain control might have worked on me once, but not tonight. I turned back, meeting her gaze with no softness, no opening for her manipulations. Not what I think, I said, my voice calm, deliberate. Amanda, do you take me for an idiot? You think I don't know where you've been? You think I haven't seen the truth staring me in the face for months? Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. For once, she didn't have the perfect line ready. No quick-witted retort to turn the situation in her favor. She looked lost, stripped of the confidence she wore like armor. You lied to me, I said, stepping closer, each word landing like a hammer. Over and over again, you lied. You thought I wouldn't notice, that I wouldn't care enough to pay attention. But I've been watching Amanda. I've been watching the whole damn time. Her hands trembled as she clutched the back of a chair for support. Daniel, I didn't mean for it to happen. Stop. I cut her off, my voice sharper than I intended. Don't waste my time with excuses. You didn't mean for it to happen? Are you seriously standing there trying to convince me this was some kind of accident? You didn't just stumble into his arms, Amanda. You made a choice. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I wasn't moved. A choice to betray me. A choice to disrespect me. A choice to burn down everything we built together. It wasn't like that, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Then what was it like? I demanded. Tell me. Enlighten me, Amanda. Tell me what it was like to sneak around behind my back. Tell me what it was like to smile at me while planning your little rendezvous in someone else's home. She tried to speak, but her voice faltered, swallowed by the weight of my words. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. You think I don't know? You think I haven't seen the texts? The photos? The tracker on your car didn't lie, Amanda. Neither did your actions. Her face went pale. She opened her mouth, then closed it, the reality of her situation sinking in. Daniel, I was going to tell you. I laughed, a cold, humorless sound. When? After you had your fun? After you were done treating me like some kind of fool? Her tears fell freely now, but they meant nothing to me. Please, she said, her voice breaking. I made a mistake. I don't know what I was thinking. Mistake? I repeated, my voice filled with disdain. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary, Amanda. What you did wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. It was selfish. And it was disgusting. Her sobs filled the room, but I wasn't finished. Do you know what I've been doing these last few months? While you were off living your little fantasy, I've been documenting everything. Every lie, every meeting, every secret you thought you could keep, I said, watching her face as panic flickered in her eyes. "What are you talking about?" she asked. I pulled my phone from my pocket and held it up for her to see. GPS logs, text records, photos, everything. I know where you've been, who you've been with, and exactly what you've been doing. Her breath caught in her throat. "You've been spying on me?" "Spying?" I shook my head. "No, Amanda. I've been protecting myself. From the moment I saw the first crack in your little facade, I knew I couldn't trust you. And tonight, I confirmed what I already knew." I stepped back, letting the weight of my words sink in. "You will pack your things. You will leave this house tomorrow. And if I find you here when I return, believe me, Amanda, everyone will know exactly what you are. Your friends, your family, the people you think respect you. I'll make sure they see you for the fraud you've become." She fell silent, tears still streaming down her face, but I didn't care. Turning toward the door, I grabbed my coat and keys, pausing briefly to look at her one last time. "You made your choice," I said simply. "Now I'll live with it." I opened the door and walked out, the cold night air hitting me like a wall. I didn't look back. There was nothing left to see. I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours, the city lights blurring past as my mind churned with 1,000 thoughts. The cold air seeped through the cracked window, sharp and biting, but it didn't matter. Every mile I put between myself and Amanda felt like shedding another layer of the lies that had suffocated me for months. Eventually, I pulled into an empty parking lot, the glow of a distant gas station casting long shadows across the cracked asphalt. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as I stared out into the dark horizon, replaying every word, every tear, every desperate plea she had made. None of it mattered. The damage was done. Reaching into my glove compartment, I pulled out a small folder, one I'd prepared weeks ago when my suspicions had turned into certainty. Inside were printouts of her text messages, photos of her car parked outside that mansion, and bank statements showing the small, repeated withdrawals she tried to hide. I had everything. I flipped through the documents slowly, letting the weight of each piece settle in my chest. This wasn't just betrayal. It was an insult to everything I had built, every sacrifice I made to give her the life she had. And she thought she could walk away and skate? Not a chance. Reaching for my phone, I scrolled to a contact labeled simply Coleman. He was an old friend, the kind of man you call when you need things handled quietly. We hadn't spoken in years, but tonight I knew exactly what I needed from him. "Coleman," I said when he answered, his voice gruff and familiar. "I need a favor. Damn, Daniel," he replied, a hint of curiosity in his voice. "Long time. What's going on?" I didn't bother with pleasantries. "I've got a situation. It's personal, and I need it resolved. Thoroughly." There was a pause. "Thoroughly, huh? That's a loaded word, my friend. You sure about this?" I thought about Amanda's face, her trembling hands, and the pathetic excuses she had offered. I thought about the years I had wasted trusting someone who clearly didn't deserve it. "I'm sure," I said firmly. Coleman exhaled through the line. "All right, send me what you've got, and I'll get started." Hanging up, I took one last look at the folder before snapping a photo of its contents and sending it over. The wheels were in motion now, and there was no turning back. As I sat there, my mind wandered to her lover, the man who thought he could step into my life and take what was mine. He probably thought he'd gotten away with it, that I was some oblivious fool who'd never see the truth. That arrogance would cost him dearly. I started the car and drove back toward the mansion. This time, I didn't stop a few blocks away to observe. I pulled right into the long, winding driveway and parked directly in front of the towering gates. My headlights illuminated the pristine facade of the house, and for a moment, I let the scene settle in my mind. Stepping out of the car, I slammed the door with enough force to send a loud echo bouncing off the walls of the estate. If he was inside, he'd know I was here. I wasn't hiding anymore. Before I could reach the front door, it opened, and there he stood, tall, confident, and oozing the kind of smugness that made my blood boil. He didn't even look surprised. "Daniel," he said, his tone calm, almost amused. "I figured you'd come around eventually." I said nothing at first, letting my silence do the work of unsettling him. Finally, I took a step closer, locking eyes with him. "You've got 5 minutes to explain yourself. Explain myself, he replied with a smirk, leaning casually against the doorframe. I think we both know what's going on here. Amanda's unhappy. She came to me for something you clearly weren't providing. His words were like gasoline on a fire. I clenched my fists at my sides, forcing myself to stay composed. You think you're untouchable, I said quietly. You think this little fantasy of yours won't come crashing down around you. Let me make one thing clear. You've made the biggest mistake of your life. He chuckled, crossing his arms. And what are you going to do about it, Daniel? Fight me? Expose me? Go ahead. Amanda's not coming back to you. No matter what you do. I stepped closer, closing the distance between us until we were nearly face to face. You don't know who you're dealing with, I said, my voice low and steady. But you're about to find out. Before he could respond, I turned and walked back to my car. This wasn't the time for a final confrontation. That would come later, when he least expected it. As I drove away, I felt a strange sense of calm. For the first time in months, I was in control. The pieces were moving, and soon, the game would be over. Morning came quietly, but I wasn't interested in its usual promise of a fresh start. This morning wasn't about hope or routine. It was about finishing what had been set in motion. Amanda wasn't home. No surprise there. She was likely still at his mansion, clinging to whatever illusion of security she thought she'd found. I didn't care where she was. What mattered was that I now had control of the narrative. For years, she had built her life around manipulating me, convincing me to ignore the signs of what she was doing. Last night, all of that ended. I poured myself a cup of coffee, letting the warmth spread through my hands as I stared at the frost-covered lawn outside. The same lawn I had mowed every summer, the same house I had worked overtime to pay off. It was all a lie, built on the foundation of a marriage Amanda had set fire to. By the time I walked into my study, the coffee had turned cold, but it didn't matter. Sitting on the desk was the folder I'd spent weeks compiling. Inside were the texts, photos, and financial records. Every piece of evidence I needed to destroy not just Amanda's lies, but also the man she thought could replace me. He wasn't just her lover. He was a fraud, plain and simple. Coleman had confirmed it. Offshore accounts, shell companies, and enough shady dealings to make my case ironclad. I picked up the phone and dialed Coleman's number. He answered almost immediately. "It's happening," I said. "Good," he replied without hesitation. "By the end of the day, the authorities will have everything they need to shut him down." "And Amanda?" I asked, though the answer was obvious. "She's tied to him now," Coleman said flatly. "When his empire crumbles, she'll go down with it." I hung up, satisfied but not relieved. Satisfaction wasn't enough. Not yet. The first ripple hit before noon. A mutual acquaintance called me, his voice laced with curiosity. "Daniel, I just heard about the fraud case," he said, pausing as though waiting for me to confirm something. "That guy, what's his name? The one Amanda's been seen with? His accounts are frozen. He's done?" "Interesting," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "I hadn't heard." There was a short laugh on the other end. "Come on, Daniel. You always know more than you let on." I didn't respond, and he quickly changed the subject. But the conversation stayed with me. It wasn't just about the destruction of a man who thought he could steal what I'd built. It was about ensuring everyone knew exactly what had happened. That evening, I dressed carefully. Not because I cared about appearances, but because tonight was about control. I chose a suit Amanda had once complimented, dark and perfectly tailored. It was a reminder, to her, to him, and to myself, that I wasn't the man she thought she could humiliate. I arrived at the mansion just as the sun dipped below the horizon. The house looked colder than it had last night, its lights casting harsh shadows across the driveway. This time, I didn't hesitate. I parked directly in front, stepped out, and walked to the door without a second thought. The door opened before I could knock, and there he was. His confidence from the night before had slipped, replaced by a thin veneer of composure. "Daniel," he said, his voice carrying an edge of uncertainty. "What are you doing here?" I didn't respond. Instead, I stepped inside, letting the door close behind me. Amanda was in the living room, her face pale and drawn. She looked at me like a stranger, someone she couldn't predict anymore. "Daniel, please," she began, her voice trembling. I raised a hand, silencing her. "Don't," I said sharply. "You had your chance to talk. Now's my turn." Her lover shifted uncomfortably, trying to reclaim some authority. "Look, I don't know what you think you're doing, but—" "Sit down," I interrupted, my tone firm. He hesitated, but the command in my voice made him comply. I stayed standing, looming over both of them as I spoke. "You thought this was a game," I said, my voice low and deliberate. "You thought you could play me, steal from me, humiliate me. But let me make one thing clear. You don't know who you're dealing with." His expression flickered, the first crack in his mask of arrogance. "I know everything," I continued, my words measured. "Your offshore accounts, your fake contracts, the way you've manipulated people to line your pockets. It's all there, documented and ready to be handed over." Amanda's face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Daniel, stop," she pleaded. "Please, just stop." I turned to her, my expression hard. "Stop? You wanted chaos, Amanda. This is what chaos looks like. Enjoy it." I pulled a folder from my jacket and dropped it onto the table in front of her lover. He picked it up, flipping through the pages, his face growing paler with each passing second. "You can't do this," he said, his voice breaking. "I already have," I replied. "By tomorrow morning, your name will be mud. Your accounts are frozen, your deals are exposed, and the authorities are coming for you." Amanda sobbed, but I didn't care. I turned on my heel and walked to the door. "This is the last time you'll ever see me," I said over my shoulder. "You wanted freedom? Now you're free. Free to deal with the mess you created." I left them sitting there, surrounded by the ruins of their plans. For the first time in months, the cold night air felt refreshing as it hit my face. As I drove away from the mansion, the bitter chill wrapped itself around me. But inside, I felt only a burning resolve. The pieces of their little game were falling apart, but I wasn't done. They thought last night was the end, but for me, it was only the beginning. When I got home, the silence in the house felt different. It wasn't oppressive like it had been before. Now, it was clean, unburdened by Amanda's lies. But there was still work to do. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop, staring at the file Coleman had sent me earlier. The full extent of her lover's fraudulent schemes was laid bare. Fake invoices, offshore accounts, and money siphoned from unsuspecting clients. And Amanda? Her fingerprints were all over the smaller transactions, subtle enough to avoid scrutiny, but damning in the right hands. It was time to escalate. I started with an email, attaching the documents Coleman had provided. The recipients were carefully chosen: a local news outlet, corporate competitors of her lover's firm, and a few acquaintances who thrived on gossip. I didn't include a name, only the facts, but I knew the damage would spread like wildfire. People love a scandal, and this one was about to make waves. By morning, my phone was buzzing nonstop. "Daniel," one of my old friends said, his voice full of urgency. "Have you seen the news?" "Not yet," I replied calmly, though I already knew what he was talking about. "It's everywhere. That guy, Amanda's whatever he is, his company's under investigation. They're saying millions are missing, and the feds are involved." "Interesting," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "You had nothing to do with this, right?" he asked, though I could hear the smirk in his voice. "Of course not," I said. "Just karma doing its thing." Hanging up, I allowed myself a brief moment of satisfaction. The dominoes were falling faster now. Her lover's empire was crumbling, and the fallout was just beginning. But I wasn't finished. Around midday, I received a text from Coleman. "The mansion will be seized by the end of the week. It's over for him." "Good," I replied. That was exactly what I wanted to hear. It was time for the final move. That evening, I drove back to the mansion one last time. The lights were on, and through the large front windows, I could see them, Amanda and her lover, sitting in the living room. They looked defeated, like two children caught in a lie too big to untangle. I didn't knock this time. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, my footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. Amanda looked up, her face pale and drawn, but she didn't say a word. Her lover, however, wasn't as subdued. He stood, his jaw clenched, trying to summon whatever shred of dignity he had left. "What the hell are you doing here?" he demanded. I ignored him, walking further into the room until I was standing directly in front of him. I just wanted to see it for myself, I said calmly. The aftermath. The ruins of everything you thought you were building. He sneered, though his confidence wavered. You think you've won? You're pathetic. Amanda never loved you. That's why she's here with me. I laughed, not because his words stung, but because of how desperate they sounded. Is that what you tell yourself to sleep at night? That she loves you? I turned to Amanda, who looked like she wanted to disappear. Tell me, Amanda, is that true? Or was he just a convenient escape from the life you thought was too boring? She didn't answer, her silence speaking volumes. I turned back to him, my tone sharp now. You're done. By this time next week, you won't have a company, a mansion, or a dime to your name. And Amanda, I glanced at her, shaking my head. She's your problem now. Good luck with that. He lunged forward, his temper finally breaking, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I stepped aside, letting him stumble past me. Pathetic, I muttered, walking toward the door. As I reached the threshold, I turned back one last time. Enjoy what's left of your freedom. It won't last long. I walked out, leaving them behind to face the storm that was about to consume them. The night was cold, but I felt lighter than I had in months. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my life. As I drove away, the mansion grew smaller in my rearview mirror, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like the future was mine again. The kitchen felt colder than it should have that morning, even though the thermostat was set to its usual 72 degrees. I sat at the table, staring at the cup of coffee in front of me. I hadn't touched it in over an hour. It wasn't about the coffee. It was about sitting still, grounding myself for what was coming. The silence in the house was almost deafening. Not the comforting kind of quiet, but the kind that comes when something's broken and there's no fixing it. I glanced at my phone, which buzzed for the 5th time in as many minutes. I didn't have to look at the screen to know what it was. The headlines had started rolling in before sunrise. Mansion raided amid fraud investigation. A high-profile scandal unfolds. I pushed the phone aside, grabbing my coat from the back of the chair. Its familiar weight was a small comfort as I slipped it on. Today wasn't about the past. It was about finishing what I'd started. The drive to the mansion was short, but it felt longer. My thoughts were too loud, replaying every lie Amanda had told, every smirk her lover had thrown my way when he thought I wasn't looking. It all played back in vivid detail, like a film I couldn't turn off. When I arrived, the scene in front of me looked like something out of a TV show. Black SUVs and unmarked vans crowded the driveway, their doors open as federal agents carried out boxes of evidence. Reporters lined the gates, their cameras clicking furiously as they yelled questions at anyone who might have answers. I parked across the street, stepping out of the car into the icy morning air. The reporters turned toward me almost instantly, their voices rising in a chaotic blur of questions. Mr. Daniels, do you have a statement about the investigation? Were you involved in exposing the fraud? What's your connection to Amanda's partner? I ignored them, my focus locked on the house ahead. I crossed the street with slow, deliberate steps, each one feeling heavier than the last. The front door was slightly ajar, and I pushed it open without hesitation. Inside, the house was a mess. Papers were scattered across the floor. Furniture had been moved, drawers left open. Agents moved methodically, speaking in hushed tones as they combed through every inch of the place. Amanda was sitting on a couch near the window, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked like a ghost of herself. Her usually flawless hair was unkempt, her face pale and drawn. She didn't even look up when I walked in. Her lover was pacing near the fireplace, his phone pressed to his ear as he barked commands. I don't care what it takes, he yelled, his voice sharp with desperation. Fix this. Fix it now. When he noticed me, he stopped mid-sentence, lowering the phone as his eyes locked onto mine. His expression shifted instantly, anger, fear, defiance. What the hell are you doing here? He demanded, his voice louder than it needed to be. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I let my gaze wander around the room, taking in the chaos. It felt fitting. I came to see how you're holding up, I said finally, my voice calm but pointed. Amanda looked up then, her eyes glassy with tears she hadn't yet let fall. Daniel, she began, her voice barely audible. Don't, I said sharply, cutting her off. "You don't get to talk now?" Her lover stepped forward, his fists clenched at his sides. "You think this is funny?" he spat. "You think you've won?" I tilted my head slightly, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of my mouth. "Won," I repeated. "This isn't about winning. This is about accountability. Something you've managed to avoid your entire life. Until now." His face turned red, his breathing growing heavier. "You pathetic," he spat, his voice dripping with venom. "Amanda never loved you. That's why she's here with me." The words hung in the air, but they didn't sting the way he thought they would. They didn't sting at all. They simply confirmed what I already knew. He was desperate, grasping at whatever fragments of power he thought he still had. "You're right," I said finally, my tone calm. "She's here with you. And look where that's gotten her. Look where it's gotten you." I gestured around the room, to the agents moving through the place like vultures circling their prey. "This is your reality now. You thought you could take what was mine and walk away untouched. But now you're learning what it feels like to lose." His temper snapped. He lunged at me, movements wild and uncoordinated. But I didn't move. I sidestepped him easily, letting his momentum carry him straight into the coffee table. The crash was loud, the wood splintering, and Amanda gasped in surprise. "Stay down," I said, my voice low and commanding. "You've already lost." He struggled to his feet, wiping at his mouth, hands trembling. But the fight had gone out of him. His eyes, once filled with arrogance, now looked defeated. I turned to Amanda, my voice softening, just enough to cut deeper. "This is the life you chose," I said. "I hope it was worth it." She didn't respond, her tears falling silently as she turned away. Without another word, I adjusted my coat and made my way toward the door. The cold air hit me as I stepped outside, but this time, it felt clean, freeing. As I drove away, the mansion faded in my rearview mirror, and the road ahead stretched out, open and waiting. For the first time in months, I felt like I could finally breathe. I didn't stop driving right away. The mansion disappeared in my rear view, but my grip on the wheel remained tight. I wasn't ready to go home yet. Home didn't feel like the right place, not after everything that had just unfolded. Instead, I found myself driving through familiar streets, past old landmarks I hadn't thought about in years. The diner where Amanda and I used to eat breakfast on Sundays, the park where we'd once walked together during the early years of our marriage. Funny how those places now felt so distant, like they belonged to someone else's life entirely. My phone buzzed again. I glanced at the screen without picking it up. Coleman. No doubt he had updates for me, more details about the fallout from the morning's raid. But I didn't feel like talking yet. I needed time to process, to think about what came next. The thing about revenge is, it doesn't leave you feeling the way you think it will. I'd spent months planning, working every angle, ensuring Amanda and her lover paid for what they'd done. And now that it was done, there was satisfaction, sure. But there was something else too, a hollowness I hadn't expected. I pulled into the parking lot of a small bar I used to visit years ago, back when life was simpler. The sign out front was faded, but the place looked the same. A little rough around the edges, but comforting in its familiarity. Inside, the air was warm, a stark contrast to the chill outside. The bartender, a guy in his 40s with a graying beard, looked up as I entered. He nodded in acknowledgement, but didn't ask questions. That was one of the reasons I'd liked this place. Nobody bothered you here. I took a seat at the far end of the bar, away from the handful of other patrons scattered throughout the room. "What'll it be?" the bartender asked, wiping down the counter in front of me. "Whiskey," I said. "Neat." He poured the drink without a word, sliding the glass across the bar to me. I took a slow sip, the warmth of the alcohol spreading through my chest. It was the first time all day I'd felt anything close to calm. The TV mounted in the corner of the bar was tuned to a news channel, the volume low. I wasn't paying much attention until I caught a familiar name flashing across the screen. Developing story. Fraud investigation deepens as new evidence emerges. A picture of Amanda's lover appeared next to the headline, his face pale and drawn in what looked like a mugshot. I couldn't help but smirk. The reporters were dissecting his entire life now, digging up every skeleton in his closet. It wasn't just about the fraud anymore. They were going after everything. His business dealings, his personal life, even his connection to Amanda. I watched for a while, sipping my whiskey as the reporters speculated about the fallout. It felt surreal, seeing it all unfold like this. Months of work, hours of planning, and now the entire world was watching the empire he'd built crumble to dust. "You know that guy?" the bartender asked, nodding toward the screen. I glanced at him, considering how much to say. "You could say that," I replied vaguely. He didn't press for more, which I appreciated. Instead, he moved down the bar to serve another customer, leaving me alone with my thoughts. As I finished my drink, I realized there was still one loose end I hadn't tied up: Amanda. She was just as guilty as her lover in all of this, and she needed to face the consequences too. The thought of her sitting alone in that mansion, surrounded by the wreckage of her choices, didn't feel like enough. No, she needed to understand what it meant to lose everything. I paid for my drink and left the bar, the cold air biting in my face as I stepped outside. My car was waiting where I'd left it, the engine still warm from the drive. As I slid into the seat, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't over. Not yet. The cold hit harder as I left the warmth of my car behind, but I didn't notice it. My mind was elsewhere, focused, sharp, ready for what needed to be done. The mansion loomed ahead of me, its windows dark except for the faint glow from the master bedroom upstairs. She was still here. The front door wasn't locked. It creaked softly as I pushed it open, the sound disappearing into the stillness of the house. Inside, the mess was just as I'd left it. Papers scattered, overturned furniture, and the faint smell of whiskey lingering in the air. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step deliberate. There was no need to rush. She had nowhere to go. At the top of the stairs, the hallway was dim, but I could make out her silhouette leaning against the doorframe of what used to be our bedroom. "Amanda," I said, my voice cutting through the silence. She didn't move at first, but then she straightened up and turned to face me. Her expression was a mixture of defiance, fear, and regret. "Daniel," she said softly, her voice trembling. I walked closer, stopping just a few feet away. "You didn't leave," I said, the words more of an observation than a question. "Where would I go?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Everything's gone. My life, my reputation, she trailed off, shaking her head. "That's what happens when you burn everything down," I said coldly. "You don't get to be surprised when there's nothing left." Her eyes flared with a spark of anger, and she took a step forward. "You think I don't know that?" she snapped. "You think I don't feel it every second of every day? But you're not innocent in this, Daniel. Don't stand there and act like you are." I tilted my head slightly, her words sliding off me like water on stone. "The only thing I'm guilty of is trusting you," I said, "of thinking you were better than this. But you weren't, were you?" she said, her anger faltering. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she whispered, her voice cracking. "But it did," I said sharply. "And now you have to live with it." We stood there for a moment, the silence between us thick and heavy. Finally, she broke it. "What do you want from me, Daniel?" she asked, her voice raw. "An apology? Would that make you feel better?" I let out a low, humorless laugh. "An apology?" I repeated. "No, Amanda. An apology won't fix this. It won't fix anything." I stepped past her into the bedroom. The room was eerily untouched, like it belonged to a different house entirely. My eyes landed on a photo on the nightstand. It was one of us, taken years ago on some beach vacation. We looked happy, relaxed. I picked it up, staring at it for a moment before turning back to her. "This," I said, holding up the photo, "is what you destroyed. Not just me. Not just us. Everything." Her lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came out. I placed the photo back on the nightstand, the glass rattling against the wood. "I'm filing for divorce first thing in the morning," I said. "Consider this your last reminder of what you gave up." Her shoulders sagged, and for a moment, she looked like she might collapse under the weight of it all. But I didn't care. Not anymore. I turned and walked toward the door. At the top of the stairs, I paused, glancing back at her one last time. "You wanted a new life, Amanda," I said softly. "Now you have it. Enjoy it." The walk down the stairs felt lighter somehow. The house didn't seem so suffocating anymore. I stepped outside, the cold air biting at my face, but this time, it didn't bother me. It felt clean. As I drove away, the mansion grew smaller in my rearview mirror until it disappeared entirely. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I could finally move forward. The quiet of the night wrapped itself around me as I drove, the cold air seeping through the edges of the car windows, but I hardly noticed. My mind raced. It wasn't over, not really. Amanda's words echoed in my head, but not because they held any weight now. No, it was because of what they revealed. She wasn't sorry for what she had done. She was sorry for the consequences. And there was a difference. That realization was enough to make me turn the car around. I pulled back onto the street, the mansion's dark outline coming into view once again. This time I wasn't calm. This time, something was boiling beneath the surface, something I'd been holding back for months. The gate was still unlocked. The front door creaked open, just as it had before, and the house greeted me with that same eerie silence. But I wasn't taking my time now. My steps were faster, heavier, echoing through the empty halls. "Amanda!" I called out, my voice sharp enough to cut through the stillness. She appeared at the top of the staircase, startled, her hands gripping the banister. "Daniel?" she asked, her voice trembling. I walked toward her, stopping at the bottom of the stairs. "I'm not done," I said simply. Her eyes widened. "What do you mean? You think this ends with a divorce?" I asked, my tone ice cold. "You think you get to just walk away and rebuild your life somewhere else? Not after what you've done." She started down the stairs slowly, her bare feet making no sound against the wood. "Daniel, I don't know what you're trying to prove, but..." "You don't get to talk," I interrupted, my voice firm. "Not this time." She froze halfway down the staircase, her hands gripping the railing tightly. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What I want," I said, stepping closer, "is for you to understand what you've done. You didn't just betray me, Amanda. You destroyed everything we built together. You dragged me into your chaos and left me to clean it up. And for what? Him." Her lips trembled, but she didn't respond. "You're not the victim here," I continued. "You're not some tragic figure who deserves sympathy. You made your choices, and now you're going to face the consequences." She stared at me, her eyes filling with tears. "You don't understand," she said finally, her voice cracking. "Then explain it to me," I said, my tone sharp. "Explain why you thought this was worth it. Explain why you thought he was worth it." For a moment, it seemed like she might. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Instead, she turned and sank onto the staircase, burying her face in her hands. I climbed the stairs slowly, stopping just a few steps below her. "I'm going to make sure you never forget this," I said, my voice low but steady. She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. "What do you mean?" I said, "that by the time I'm done, you'll have nothing left. Not him. Not this house. Not even your name." Her breath caught in her throat. "You can't do that," she said, her voice shaking. "Watch me," I said, turning and walking back down the stairs. As I reached the bottom, I pulled out my phone. The message I sent was short and to the point. I started the process. By the time I reached my car, the wheels were already in motion. Amanda didn't know it yet, but every account she had access to was about to be frozen. Her connections, her safety nets gone. She would have no one to turn to. No way to rebuild the life she'd destroyed. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice. The drive home felt different this time. The weight I'd been carrying for months had finally started to lift. Amanda and her lover thought they could play their games and walk away unscathed, but they were wrong. When I pulled into my driveway, the house felt different. It wasn't just a place filled with memories anymore. It was mine again. I stepped inside, locking the door behind me. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. Not because everything was fixed, far from it, but because I'd taken back control. This was my life now, and for the first time, I was ready to live it on my own terms.